the theoretical frames you used, and it's a very extraordinary work. That also from India doing it. I really appreciate it.
I'm always really fascinated by Latin America because it started with literature, then slowly it just grew to something in this form and shape today what it is. I think it is. I'm planning
Now
this.
that we have Nikhila, should we look at the beginning, right?
Yeah. We have gone live on Facebook. So welcome all to this session of Talking Films Online. This is the 40th session of Talking Films Online. We began in June, as you know, last year, and we have been meeting every Saturday since then at 9 p.m., mostly at 9 p.m. This week we have Ankhi Mukherjee, who suggested Lucrecia Martel's film La CIENAGA to us, and she will be leading the discussion today. Ankhi is our own. So she did her PhD from our department in EFL University. Prior to that, she studied film studies, post-graduation in film studies from Jadavpur University. She's probably one of the few who have worked extensively on Latin American cinema in India. So in that sense, she's probably one of the few scholars whom we can turn to when we want, someone to talk about Latin American cinema. She has presented papers in a number of national and international seminars, conferences, and one of her important papers was on Lisandro Alonso. And she's also going to soon publish a book chapter in a forthcoming volume in a few days' time. Her research interests are wide and varied. Of course, it's Latin American cinema figures in a big way in her research interests, as does third world cinema, also transnational cinema theory, post-colonial studies, comics and graphic novels and visual culture, Eurocentrism, and non-Western cinema, intermediality and pastiche, cultural memory studies. So as you can see, she's a young scholar who has diversified her research in a number of different directions. Ankhi, welcome. We're very happy to have you with us and listen to you present on La CIENAGA. Thank you.
I'm not only happy, ma'am, I'm very honored that you remembered and you called me to give a talk. I would love to show certain clips in between, but today my internet is not very supportive. So I thought I'll omit that particular part now, as we all have watched the film. And we just recently watched, probably we can remember the images and I can just directly go to the talk. Now, before we start talking about La CIENAGA or Lucrecia Martel, I would like to give a brief overview of Latin American history and especially bringing that context to the Latin American cinema and how. And ma'am has just right now was telling about the diversified interest that my study ventures into. It is not because that I was very versatile in nature. Okay, I probably wouldn't have been if not my research area would offer that versatility. Latin America posits a very strange kind of position. Studying Latin America posits certain strange kind of unique problems, theoretical problems, because Latin America is a third world country. Yet the history of Latin American cinema or the Latin America was not really as going with the Africa or Asian states, which has a colonial past. Latin America do have a colonial past. However, it started way ahead of any other colonialism that started in Africa and Asian countries. It started in 15th to 16th century, and it got over by 19th century, early 19th century, the entire Latin America was liberated from the colonial clutches, whereas the other parts of the third world were still deep into colonialism. Rather, their colonialism started taking a crystallized form and taking a proper shape into their politics. And why other country, third world countries are, dealing with colonialism, Latin America started dealing with the neo-colonial phase by the USA, and which resulted into series of military regimes, which is a history or the saga of state violence and terrorism. So when we study Latin American cinema or Argentine cinema, as Argentina, Uruguay, Chile, Venezuela, Bolivia are few countries which has seen very repressive, suppressive, and very extensive traumatic history that led to the military regimes. And this is a complete state violence, state terrorism, a concocted state terrorism. Out of several different military regimes that existed in Argentina, one of the most crucial military regime was the Dirty War, or as it is called, Guerra Sucia. Guerra Sucia, or Dirty War, is the particular timeline that happened in 1973 to 1986, just the Peronista government, and overthrowing the Peronist government and establishing a military regime, which is started by Jorge Videla, and which has a series of 6 dictators, ended with Leopoldo Galtieri. This 7 years long dirty war was one of the most traumatic past of Argentina in the recent history. Many scholars who have been studying dirty war has been giving an opinion that it might be even worse, attack on humanity or human rights than Nazism in Europe. One of the reasons why Nazism got the prominence because it happened to Europeans, and as this dirty war was condoned to the Argentinian, that it get not much of the global attention. However, the impact or the torture done to the Argentine citizens was extreme in order. One thing that is, I'm not going to talk a very detail about dirty war. I'm going to just very briefly touch about it because this has a very importance in understanding Latin American cinema. So dirty war, the 7 years of torture, one of the key element of this was a large amount of massive amount of disappearance. The particular agenda of dirty war was mainly the establishment of the Catholic Christianity, and also free market economy, which particularly attacked the communist or left liberal ideological sentiment of the country. Anyone who is remotely associated with that was attacked, and in the end turned into disappearance. There was a mass disappearance. And when we talk about a disappearance, this disappearance was not just a person disappearing for a few days. The person's existing history or the data available, their records, any kind of record, school, college, employment, birth, death, any kind of record, pictures, memories were completely disappeared from the country. Several people went to exile, and several people disappeared. The official record of this disappearance entails to 13,000, which gives a clear idea that the actual was more than million. The particular dirty war ended with a series of protests by women, or especially mothers, in the Plaza de Mayo, where they refused to leave that particular place, and a series of protests by the women, which led this kind of end of the dirty war. After the dirty war, we see there is a very interesting take that cinema is turning from 80s, mid 80s. One of the very important texts is La Oficial Historia, which is also started talking about the dirty war. Post dirty war, we see that Argentine cinema suddenly started having a strange connection with dirty war. Dirty war kind of created a traumatic event into the particular country's psyche that is kind of impacted by a process of remembering and forgetting. There is an immense attempt given to make the memories forget, to kind of delete the memory, kind of make the memory go to oblivion. And there is an innate kind of resistance from the citizens' point where they want to remember the memory, because this memory is the only access to the history that has been completely presented into the fabricated manner. Now, this kind of situation led to a very different aesthetics in Latin American cinema. The narrative of the Latin American cinema, or especially Argentina in this particular case, we see that could not replicate a cinematic language that is rested upon the classical Hollywood style or the continuity style of understanding. The narrative cannot be like that. One of the precise reasons is that the classical Hollywood or the continuity editing style presents a narrative of an individual and their psychological journey, whereas Argentine cinema rather prefers to present a history of the nation. Very strangely, one thing I want to highlight here, the Spanish word of history is historia. Now, historia is not only meant as history, but historia is also meant in story. In Spanish, story and history both are said or called in that word by historia. And it is interchangeably used, and with the context, you need to understand whether they are talking about history or whether they are talking about the story. And this story or the historia is itself taking into the position of a narrative structure, because the official story or the official history is completely fabricated history that does not tell the story of the people who suffered a traumatic past, whose loved ones, whose entire relations, not a single family, Argentine family, has experienced any one of disappearance. There is no case, not a single family who did not experience any one of friends or family disappeared or had not to go for an exile. In this particular situation, we see that cinema creates a narrative post Dirty War, a journey, a narrative that kind of traces the history through memories. And this particular narrative is the main thematic connection with this narrative is alienation. The alienation is the key thematic content as well as the key characteristics that each and every element is taking up, be it a cinematic language, be it the narrative, be it the characterization. Each and every element of a cinema or a film production kind of defined with the concept of alienation. Here, I would like to say a very important point that Buenos Aires is a capitalist city, very much styled into the European model as it has a colonial past, very much heavily influenced by French and British architectures, boulevard, arcadia, plazas, and all this kind of architectural styles. And it is also has a history of the industrial capitalism as a phenomena, which also generating a kind of alienated characters. And this particular history is not having a very transparent, direct, straight approach. The only way to access this history is through memory and nostalgia, because other access are completely censored or stopped. Now, this particular reason gave a very important kind of a genre in Latin America, starting from the literature, that is magical realism, where certain magical elements are included into the reality and which is infused in such a manner that creates the particular sensation of a traumatic past, which metaphorizes the particular traumatic past. So this Latin American narratives or Argentine narratives leads with this particular very paradoxical being of remembering and forgetting. The history is charted or traced through the process of remembering as well as forgetting. There is an immense necessary need and urge to remember what the state wants you to forget. Yet, in this process of kind of conscious process of remembering, I'm ending up blurring the real memory. I'm also end up being forgetting, and thus creates a sense of schizophrenia, which leads to a different kind of narrative. After this, we will quickly come to the particular point of La Ciénaga, and we'll try to see that how this particular backdrop is completely present in La Ciénaga, and how Lucrecia Martel is trying to access this particular narrative. This narrative is also not only the narrative of the exploitation that Latin America is going through since 500 years. Nestor Garcia Conclini is saying that this particular trauma that Latin America had to go through is created a situation of an acute underdevelopment. And this acute underdevelopment is not just a stage. It is a state of being. It is something that is the state of being, that is synonymous to that particular nation and all the story that that nation generates. And in this particular context, we see that La Ciénaga is also kind of narrating a saga of a country, a history. It kind of replicates the history of the country, the space where the particular film is situated, the characters that we are creating, all kind of embodies this traumatic past. They are embodiment of the continuation of the history. They are the history itself, because their story is the history. Their historia is the historia of the nation. From this particular part, we are seeing that Lucrecia Martel in this particular film, the La Ciénaga, which is English translation is The Swamp, is a story of bourgeoisie decadence. Martel feels that bourgeoisie Argentina is a society that lives vaguely, hoping that nothing will ever change, and in terror of everything repeating itself. There is a kind of strange, because it is a history of 500 years. It is a history, not mine, not yours. It is not, my father's history, my generation. It is a generation after of generations history. There is no change in that history. One particular, form of state terror gave birth to another form of state terror. But there is an always existent form of a state terror that made the particular characters or the citizen into the kind of permanent state of paranoia, permanent state of fear of losing something. It is not always very specified what is the fear of loss, yet there is an imminent fear of loss at all levels. Increasingly, this particular fear of loss leads to certain other thing, that nothing is going to change and history is going to repeat itself, because that is, as I said, that one particular traumatic event got over only to taken care of by another traumatic event. And this is particular a sense that we see this kind of a mental state that is experienced by each and every character, including the audience. Because here camera, which is the particular, we all know that audience takes the position of the camera. Here, the camera is also acting in a very weird, abnormal way, which is very violent in nature, exactly the way the space, as well as the characters, as well as the content in the narrative presents an acute violence. And there's a strange manner in normalizing this strange of violence, as if this violence is not violent enough, as if this is the state of being, again referring to the context of state of being. Okay. And this particular, this particular decadence is kind of becoming synonymous to the characters, which is the decadence of the history of the Latin America or Buenos Aires for that matter. However, the film is not really situated in Buenos Aires, but in a province. And this alienation, the main point that comes to the representation, the concept that Martel or Argentine cinema is trying to express is the concept of alienation. Alienation is the key element through which I'm trying to trace my history, and through which, while I try to trace my history, probably I'm trying to eliminate the context of alienation. It is a mere attempt of enduring that process. And in this process, how this concept of alienation is being represented in Martel's cinema, it is represented through fragmentation. each and every cinematic element, each and every element of cinematic language or the narrative or the, characters are presented into the fragmented manner. Let's start with the important areas that how this fragmentation is becoming one of the key expression style or representation style of Martel. Martel is first and foremost breaking the narrative. It's her narrative. It's itself a fragmented narrative. There is a very absence of three-act narrative structure. There is no cause or effect relation to the narrative, why this particular event is changing to this particular scene. One scene starts from this context and ends in this and starts another scene. There is no cause and effect direct connection to that event or the change flow of events. There is also no conflict has risen. There are a lot of conflicts. There is too many conflicts, but not one conflict which is given importance to develop enough to kind of create the dramatic pressure. There is also where nothing is resolved and where only the entire narrative, where only a summer has passed in a very decadent manner, where the entire idea of being is fragmented. This particular idea of narrative fragmentation is also introduced when we see that camera often forgets to record or capture the particular main event, what is happening. There are so many sudden eruption of violent events happening, or sudden eruptions of eros, a moment where the life force is too much, sudden happiness, sudden celebration, and sudden burst of violence, several bits and pieces events that are happening throughout the film. Not a single moment the camera is patient enough to observe this particular moment and kind of make sense. The camera is also kind of acting in a confused manner where it is looking into the event, which is the main point of event according to any other narrative. However, not in this narrative, because the camera itself often forgets to record that. Camera also has this kind of sense of oblivious attitude towards this. Camera is kind of jarringly entering or pervading into the private space of the family, which deals to the another fragmented perspective of the space. Very interestingly, the Argentine narratives are very much associated with a fragmented space, where the space, apparently, if you look into the space, we'll see that there could have been a picture of a very picturesque depiction of this landscape. However, there is a complete absence of it. The space is not recorded into a picturesque manner. Instead, it projects a very inherent violence. The hardship of the people, the hardship of the nation is kind of intimately linked with the hardship of the land, the terrain, the space. Thus, the space is also represented into a very fragmented manner. How the space is being fragmented? The space itself creates the sense of violence. The space is hard. The space is merciless. The space does not offer you any kind of solace. The characters, instead of being harmonious, homely with the nature, whenever the character is out in the nature, even if it's just by the swimming pool, there is an inherent sense of tension and conflict that is rising from the space, because space is also narrating the stories of the traumatic past. And Lucretia Martel's space is not just a space, but it is often becoming one of the key characters. And this also leads to the another particular point of the characters. These characters are also very, alienated character. They are solitary character. They are isolated character. Their main characteristic traits is either weirdness or extreme indifference, or kind of merging both. They're indifferent to anything other than themselves. They are not even kind of after some point they're going into the oblivion mode, that they need to concentrate on this particular fact anymore. And this particular sense of violence generate from every small nuanced areas. How? The space is often fragmented. The entire frame is very much close up, mid close up, or mid shot. And this particular each and frame are extremely crowded frames, and not a single character are not fragmented. Each and every character that is present in the frame are fragmented in some way. We see somebody's face, somebody's hand, somebody's hair, somebody's sides, and these characters move in a kind of continuously, they move, shift focus and move their places. And camera, the handheld camera, which also kind of moves around the space in a complete violent disregard for private space, and invades the privacy and kind of breaks into this particular space, where we experience a sense of claustrophobia with too many sweaty bodies colliding with each other and shifting focus, and camera moving around it in a frenzy. Handheld camera. And the camera is, even when the frame are focusing on one particular face, we often see this face is often jarred with other existence of some other body parts or something that obstructs the particular frame from the foreground. With some or other obstructions into the foreground, we see the frame is continuously being fragmented. The characters continuously being fragmented, either they are faces or their bodies. The concentration is on to fragment the entire being, the state of being, and present the sense of alienation, which is only indifferent to the surroundings, yet they have a sense of attachment, which is often kind of dwindling, often kind of blurred with the oblivion, as if they're forgetting they are attached. They're forgetting their belongingness time to time. And there's a strange sense of cruelty that presents in not only the narrative, the characters that we see, the two different sets of characters, and adult characters who are extremely wasted, drunk, decadent, irresponsible, absolutely indifferent about whatever the students' world or children's world are going through. Now, this particular adult are, even when series of things, when one after another problems are happening, when Mecha is falling and cutting herself, they are very, very reluctant to get up and help them. There are a lot of commotions are happening. These children are talking about, telling narratives of a very horrific narrative past, very cruel stories, very unsettling stories in a very normal manner. And all the time, parents are present into this particular spaces who are also not noticing that this is probably an ultimate point of abnormality, that children are talking about the cruel moments into such normal, nonchalant way, as if just we are talking about chocolates and teddy bears. And this particular way, the children character, the utilization of the child characters are not like the way neorealism or in Iranian new wave appropriating the child gaze. This is kind of it, the child itself, the child character, all the children are also embodying the history of their country, and that's why they are also kind of embodying the cruelty, the general cruelty. Their scratched face, distorted eyed face, having a gun at his hand without any kind of reaction towards it, that this is a gun. Not even an extreme affinity, that a childlike awe towards a gun, not even a kind of fear towards a gun. We do not see any kind of childlike engagement with the gun, rather a very nonchalant possession of the gun, as if it is an extension of my own self. It keeps me protected from this otherwise violent surroundings that I'm dealing with. And in this particular entire visuality in the end is kind of amplified with the use of sound. The sound, last but not the least, this is my last point, this particular introduction of sound. Martel is designing a very unique soundscape for her film. Her film sounds are majorly dominated by too many ambient sounds or background sounds, which are generating from the part of the story, the diegetic sound. And all these sounds are coming from the nature, which is definitely not giving us a harmonious, homely, nurturing feature of a nature. This nature is not nurturing. This nature, on the contrary, is merciless, very hard and violent. It kind of is not giving you the particular motherly, homely providence here. And this particular idea of the space is created through the unique utilization of a sound. Not a single scene probably is devoid of multiple background sound, which in the end creates a sense of chaos. And that leads to the idea of the claustrophobia, the uneasiness that Martel is trying to, create. And through this, we see that there is a sense of fear of loss, and this particular Martel's La Ciénaga is definitely a horror story. But this horror is not coming from a supernatural, ghostly, spiritual features. This particular horror is the horror that the country has suffered. And this soundscape, this fragmented visuality is what is trying to capture or archive the suffering of the Argentina or the Argentines, and in a way, an attempt to kind of archive the history. I think I will end my discussion now and will like to listen what the other people think about the film, because I'm also planning to write this particular film, and part of my one of my research question is trying to figure out that how this particular film is received from the audience who do not have the particular understanding of the Latin American history, how the cinematic language basically presents itself, or if the cinematic language is speaking for itself, the whatever I was trying to narrate in this last half an hour. So I will try to listen to everyone's opinion on this thing. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ankhi, for that very neat presentation. The film and Ankhi's presentation is now, open for discussion. Anyone who wants to come in at this point with and share their thoughts of the film, most welcome. Please,
Can I
yeah,
come in?
yeah, please, Geeta. Yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Ankhi, so much, especially for setting the film in the historical context. And for me, the film straight away reminded me to a great extent of Waiting for Godot, Samuel Beckett's play, because just like in Godot, here also there are many scenes in which they show children, adults, all claiming to see the figure of the Virgin, like they are waiting for some kind of redemption. But just like in Godot, nothing of that kind happens. And even in terms of action, there's nothing really, there's no progressive action in the sense that, like for instance, just to cite one example, they're making plans, to go to Bolivia for shopping. But that really never happens. Right till the end of the film, it doesn't seem to happen at all. And another thing that that struck me about the film is the contrast between adult lassitude and the energy of the children. The children are so energetic, shouting, screaming, bumping into each other, and all of that. And then, the adults, for the most part, are inebriated and just indifferent to even something as grave as a woman falling and injuring herself. Yeah, and the soundscape, yes, it struck me also, as something very beautifully done. The clinking of glass and the constant rain, the gunfire. And the swamp is also, I think, both literally and symbolically conveyed. There is that, I think 2-3 times there is a repetition of that scene of the animal caught in the swamp. And it's so tragic to see, the kids actually, shooting the animal, even though they know that, there's no way the animal is going to, harm them or anything. He's, as it is, helpless and struggling in that swamp, and yet further tortured by the children with the guns. And of course the multiple stories in the film, like, and I was watching an interview of Martel where she says that I think there are some background sound. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was watching an interview of hers on YouTube where she said that she used to, as a child, she used to listen to a lot of stories from her grandmother. And that has greatly influenced her filmmaking style as well. And I think one can see that kind of storytelling in the film also. So these are some of the things that struck me. I thought I should share it.
Very
Yeah.
interestingly, these are the particular things that are happening in the film. As I said, that the space itself is very generating the source of violence. And the violent nature is so much that it kind of creates a very normal reaction. The narrative is not capturing the reactions of the abnormalities, which is one of the classical traits of the classical narrative style, where you continuously record the impact of the event through the or violence or shock through the reactions. But here there's a complete indifferent characters. That's why the reactions are not properly captured. There is a kind of camera is forgetting to do that, as if all the time forgetting. And the children, as I said, that nobody is attempting to bring the cow up from the swamp. It was stuck in the swamp for several days, and then obviously in due course of the process died. But probably in the very beginning, when this particular shot was introduced, if anybody would have tried to lift it up with a rope or something, probably something could have been done. But the intention was never there. There's a lack of intention to help, indifference to help. And what happens 3 days, the children are going so that they can see whether they died. Can we kill it? Should we shoot it? This is a kind of strange, violent appearance of a normalization, which is very unsettling for anyone who probably do not understand the trauma or the paranoia that is going through, which is very unsettling for other audience anywhere outside the popular. Especially if your understanding of cinema is heavily involved with a popular narrative or classical narrative style or popular cinema. It is extremely jarring experience to see something so normally happening.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, please go ahead. Jayan, who is it? Jayanto, please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
Once again, I congratulate Ankhi for her beautiful presentation and this film. Also, I agree with most of the things that she said. I mean, this whole fact, which I found very interesting as a part of Argentine history or Latin American history, that there is absolutely a very thin line between story and history, which is actually the way people are looking at history right now. All history is basically fiction. I mean, if you look at people like Pierre Nora and Natalie Zemmour Davis and Hayden White and all that, basically this is what they are saying, that there is no difference. As as long as history is written in a narrativized manner, it has to be, not completely fact. It has to be a bit of fiction. And also, I think the strange and terrible history of Latin America, its political history, the kind of violence it has created, has also created a certain indifference to violence. and indifference to the suffering of others, and indifference to human pain, and uh, part of the desire to escape the unpleasantness of the reality is magical realism. I mean, it may not be very, very visible in this film, but that is what creates it. When the reality itself is too harsh to deal with, to comprehend, then one tries to escape it by fantasizing about it, by creating some kind of a magic about it. Also, there are two forces which seem to be pulling at different directions in this film, and which is characterized uh, by the by the lake, by the swimming pool, which itself is turgid, which is full of dirty leaves and all that, which could be a swamp in itself, and the lassitude and the indifference, the inebriation of the adults all around, and also the energy of the children. But at the same time, the children have an energy which has seen or imbibed consciously or unconsciously so much violence that it is inured to it. And the very fact that they think of shooting that animal which they know very well is trapped in that swamp, which everyone in this film is in some way or the other, not thinking about the consequences, not even about what will happen to that little boy Luciano, who is standing right in front of this thing, and then we are not even, the camera doesn't tell us what happens. Just like when Momi jumps into the pool, the camera doesn't tell us what has happened, because everyone looks down and there is this swirling, dirty, turgid water, and nothing happens. And much later, very, very matter of factly, we find her sitting with a group of other children. And same happens with Luciano. And I think partly the two forces which are pulling at this film are the names of the two places that the people inhabit. One name we are told, that is La Cienaga, which is Sinaya or Sinaga, which is the swamp, which is the city, and which is metaphorically everybody's life here, out of which they will not even think about getting out. And the other is the Mandrake, the country house where they live. Now, Mandrake is it's a symbol of intoxication, it's a symbol of forgetting, it's a symbol of hallucination, and it is also a symbol of sexual desire. So, a very, very potent force which permeates through the film is the promise of sex and the denial of sex. At each moment that you find that things could happen, there is burgeoning sexuality among the adolescents, but nothing happens. Nothing happens because that is something which has become a part of their lives. This is the indifferent way which they have been taught by the adults to react to life in the first place, to react to violence, to react to everything. And also this very important factor of the way she uses sound. Sound is always off the screen. It is always off the screen. It is distant thunder in the opening frame. And that gives us an idea of what is going to unfold before our eyes, things. And of course, all kinds of incidental, little, probably not important sounds, which are always in the background, and have nothing to do with what is happening in the frame. And here also, it may be an expression of the negativity which has become a part of everyone's life in these troubled times. But we find that she uses sound in order to bring a sense of completeness, a sense of fulfillment in this film. Is that the beginning frame is, is accompanied by the sound of distant thunder as to what might happen. And then in the end, if you listen very carefully, when nothing happens, but there is in the background a sound of chirping birds. So which I think is very, very deliberate, and it is very, very conscious. So it's a wonderful film. It talks about ennui, it talks about lassitude, it talks about sexual desire and the denial of sex, and a kind of being trapped at all the time. In a system which will not let them be themselves. That is what I thought of the film. Beautiful film, and although it may not be magical realism, but I think that some of the factors which create magical realism is very much present in this film. I mean,
Magical
one can,
realism, they are not trying to probably directly create a magical realism. I just brought the particular point because there is a magical realism is originating from Latin America itself, and the very pretext of magical realism is that, you know, when you cannot access your story through the direct methods, so what you do is you invent certain, you know, magical being and infuse that with the reality in order to tell your story. You know, this is this magical realism effect, you know, impact, it's coming through the story of Virgin Mary, something that as woman is seeing, nobody has seen, and whoever is believing her also in the when with the two or three questions that comes with the doubt, also presenting with the doubt and presenting with the fatigue and something that denial to accept that. But there is a very strange desire to also make other believe in that, because this is also a normal reaction of this kind of traumatic past, that either you have a sense of hope towards the desperation that someday this will end. Okay, this has to end somewhere, and where there is a extreme sense of that, you know, Catholicism that we see in the film, that even they are not at all any religious characters, not had any religious inclination, yet from time to time they are all talking about the Virgin Mary and whether people have seen it or not, and some one of the character is also going to see and end up coming and say that I didn't see anything. Not that the character is very disappointed of not seeing that, as if also at some point he's forgetting that whether he has to be disappointed automatically leads to another of the element, that is fear. That what next, fear of losing, which is also epitomized with another unseen narrative thread, that is dog rat. Not the single element, whether the fear quotient of dog rat or the hope quotient of Virgin Mary are seen or accessed, but they're always felt with the auditory presence. They are always felt, and with the very and interesting that you have talked about the sound. Martel has a very interesting way of making films. She first designs the soundscape, and accordingly she designs the visual. I'm still trying to find out how she is doing that, but whenever I try to do that in my own mind, especially when I was trying to teach filmmaking in the last semester, I was trying to do that, I failed miserably. I had to first think about a visual, and based on that think about the sound, but she does the process otherwise, and that's why her sound is very, very important element into the film. It tells half of the narrative, literally half of the narrative.
yes. And also, I would just like to add here that that another element of fear which is not seen but only heard and felt in a very palpable way by the little child is the neighborhood dog, which keeps on shouting and trying to break the wall in between, and the child is always uh, scared of what might be on the other side, like the rat, whatever
Dog
that,
rat.
the dog rat,
Dog
and
rat.
ultimately these two scenes are juxtaposed, that he hears the sound, he looks at the wall for some time in fear, trying to comprehend, and that is the time when he climbs the step and ultimately dies. And that death is also shown as a kind of an anticlimax, as to how this society does not react to violence at all. That's what I felt.
No, that is also another story of a metaphoric narrative of the failed revolutions in Argentina, series of failed revolutions in Argentina. And that is why probably the death of a child, which the classical narrative probably would have give a lot of point to generate emotions out of the event, but slowly camera detaches from that, distantly, and come back to the previous position when the scene started, and then quickly leaves the space once again, very unemotionally detached manner, leaves the space. altogether, as if death of a child is another normal, which is normal in their land, to be more specific, very specifically, because on 27th May in 1976, one of the very important filmmaker of Argentina, just before I telling the name, the proper noun got slipped, was disappeared. And while when he disappeared, he was walking with his 4-year-old son. The 4-year-old son was also disappeared along with that particular person, which never to be found ever. I'm just very much forgetting the filmmaker's name. Uh, Very famous filmmaker. I'll just probably come in a while. The name. So this is the situation of the country. There are series of disappearance, mass tortures, extreme, attack on the human rights and humanity, to be more specific. It's supreme disregard towards humanity.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else would like to? Yes, Kalpalata, please go ahead.
I would begin with saying that I really liked her talk very much, and definitely it has given me a lot of interesting insight into Argentinian films. And of course, what she said, I saw in the film, the historical alienation is very much reflected in the cinematic narrative, in the sense that there is a lot of confusion in the beginning. We don't know who is who and what is their relation with each other, and there is a lot of confusion also regarding the relation, because this girl is crying for her servant, uh, and that really creates confusion, because I asked myself why she is crying, whether what kind of relation she has with her. And of course, the I really like the sound in the beginning of the wine, ice in the wine glass, and it was really lovely sound. And but later, the sounds were more threatening. It became more and more threatening, and it was scary, because we didn't know what is going to happen, and what is going to come in future, in the coming scenes. And of course, death is not shown. They are very, the camera is, and the narrative itself is very indifferent to the to showing the death. It is always avoided. uh, we don't know what happened to that boy who fell down the stairs. Yeah, this is all I wanted to say. And yes, I really liked your presentation, Ankhi. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else would like to come in? Yes, Varnabil, please go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. And also for all the, responses. Yes, that as you pointed out, it has this form which is very fragmentary. You find, profiles, where you need, frontal shot as a response to, shattering event, like that, or fragments of the bodies you have throughout, that kind of performance style. Not only here, but if you look at, Lucretia Martel's, authorship, like, the title of her film, Headless Woman, that itself symbolizes, and The Holy Girl is about, the critical moment of the music fellow rubbing against her, and also our latest, the Zama, where you find this man would have, got, he would have died, but he is now his hand has been cut off. So it is like our authorship, and we can relate it, to. What I feel, that from where this form would be coming is one of the ways we are not able to cohere, at a point of time when, as you pointed out, that phase from 1976 to 1983, when thousands of people disappeared. And you have other feminist like Potio's documentary on Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, where mothers are waiting. So that mourning is not possible. See, people have disappeared, and we do not know what happened to them till today. And of course, that you will find there was some excavation, something came up, but it doesn't, help the people who lost somebody to come out of the trauma, because, that is the state they are. So therefore, that the point of, that death itself becoming pointless, that you couldn't mourn, somebody died and you couldn't even know, that what exactly happened to them. And it is that thing which is haunting, which is personal as well as a collective trauma. And that is what I think is very special about Lucretia Martel's authorship, because she has found a way to address this through form. Whereas a film like Plaza de Mayo, Mothers, is more about traditional documentary, which has its own space. It is, it is very poignant, that is necessary, but also we need films like this, which could address, that kind of a trauma through its form, that. And I think, particularly, when you asked this question in the beginning, that as an Indian or somebody, who is outside, Latin American culture, how would you respond? Of course, I have to admit that, right from my days at FTI, I have grown, along with, Solanas and, House of the Furnaces, Third Cinema, and even arguing, that like Mrunalda, has made Third Cinema, in that kind of, form, in that kind of, mode. Films prior to, it was labeled as Third Cinema. We strongly argue, recently, Sangeeta Soma has written a wonderful dissertation, on that. And so, my friends have been doing this kind of work, young friends have been doing this kind of work. But what I feel, even then, that we are outside that culture. And, like, for example, that when Marquis wrote 100 Years of Solitude, it took us all, bowled us over, that we felt, oh, I mean, it's so fabulous. And also it is like our own culture, our own story, all the magic he is doing, and it is almost like, he kind of, took away from, the cup from our lip, it was almost there, some Indian could have written. And you can see the continuing influence, including, somebody like Rizvi, somebody like Arundhati Roy, that continuous kind of influence of, what Marquis did. So coming back to, that how does it haunt us, a film like this, or, Martel's, aesthetics? I think that it haunts us because, that we are linked in some way to Latin American culture by being this kind of ancient civilization, which is, coexisting, with all the mythologies, the mythos, surrounding it. I mean, you could give it a form like Virgin Mary, but we are also constantly waiting, being this kind of a civilization of a Messiah to arrive. And we know that now it is not going to arrive in our post-colonial situation. We have experienced that darkness, that the humane failure of Nehruvian nationalism, or this crude Hindu fundamentalist rise. But we know that it's a promise, it's like Derridian promise, or Derridian theorizing of justice, which is only to come tomorrow, that it is not going to arrive today, when I'm alive. So then how to think of the form? So I think that way, her aesthetics are appealing to us, as a culture, more than, say, leave Hollywood, as this imperialist, or the cause of all this. Let us even look at European art cinema as the second world cinema. Even they are after some kind of, a coherence, or intellectually trying to explain, like in Godard, that in a sense, that yes, this cannot be solved, but intellectually I still can have an insight into it, get my point? Or through Brecht, that through alienation we have an answer, we have a counter voice, as a protest. But here it is doing something else, isn't it? I mean, she is pointing to the coexistence, So I think that is what, the appeal of, this kind of form, I would say, more than the content. The contents are, I mean, mere illusions, that they are, as you said, they are one among the many narratives, which sometimes may seem to have a closure, or sometimes, you can imagine, yes, it has given me a closure, but it is in the soundscape, isn't it? I mean, she complicates because, they cannot be reduced to words. Even if images are difficult, they allow, multiple interpretation, but the organization of images does allow some space for us to interpret. But sound is different. That language of sound, particularly, when it's a kind of aesthetics of cacophony, as well as some kind of, space and melody, like the chirping of the birds. So she complicates, I think that has also to do with, I think,
Even the melodial element is always hampered with other existings of the chaotic sound.
Yes, yes. That you have, also, that strongly culturally rooted sounds, isn't it? I mean, throughout, like even in the authorship of the other great, Latin American master, Walter Salas, isn't it? Simplification, if you look at it, the way they will build the sound is so special, something we can only see, say, in India, maybe in the works of, somebody like John Abraham, we can see that kind of an impulse, that kind of an impulse. So I will stop here. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, and I will allow other people to talk. Thank you.
No, what you highlighted is quite important here, because this, as you said, that there is a completely personal story, yet a collective trauma, and this particular thing has been continuously experienced with a personal narrative. Every characters who are crowdedly present in one single frame has their own problem, own strays of thought, yet they are put together into a collective place as if they are all different uneasiness, but uneasiness nonetheless, kind of combined with that uneasiness together. And this particular narrative is giving the precedence to the turmoil that is the entire story is dealing with. It creates an uneasiness, and it is just the problem is not increased, problem is not heightened, but the uneasiness does.
Yes. That is, you can talk about, the temporality of trauma.
Temporality, yeah.
That, the time is extended. It doesn't mean that we have, that they become immune to death,
No.
It's only in the long stretch,
It is that there is too many of it, too much of it.
Beauty of history, that what it is, to say that trauma cannot be easily represented, isn't it? That struggle, then how can we then think of form to represent it? That
In this
extended.
context, I would like to read one small quote that Lucretia is saying when she's kind of designing the visual and or auditory scope of the, behind the swimming pools. So she's saying that I don't like swimming pools because I have the feeling that they are always dirty, like an infection. At the same time, in Argentina, there are not many public swimming pools. So I think that the idea of having a cube of water just for a few people is like having a slave, to think that all of this water belongs to you as your property. I like to shoot in swimming pools though, because it's like a room below the level of the ground full of water. There are many similarities between the behavior of a body inside a swimming pool and out of the pool. Both are an elastic space, it's fluid. The sound outside and the waves inside the pool both touch you in the same way. I think there are a lot of similarities in perception between being in a pool and being in the world.
No, absolutely. That is, we should also, remember that she has this, famous film on the gated communities, tracking, in a car along, take over that, and how you cannot, jump over, the other side. And also, I think it is symbolic of, in a way, what America has done to Latin America, that entire, because, promising, this kind of synthetic gated life, insulated life, at least for the rich people, but it has kind of, like reduced everything to the swamp, not just their luxury, but also their entire life, so it's also a metaphor, for that, if you look at it. And also the way, it has affected generation after generation, when you have these children looking at,
The common saying that backyard of USA.
Yes, absolutely. It's a
As
metaphor.
it is always taken geopolitically, backyard. How can you treat an entire continent as a backyard?
Yes, absolutely. And also that, that you rightly, posited also, Jain Das Gupta, he also, pointed to that, the swimming pool, as a swamp is very important in this particular film. That in all our films, she has, certain spaces located like that. Here it is the swimming pool. And, in a way, you could argue the entire narrative revolves around that. Even if you have many stories, it is always about the sensorium of this the dirty stagnant water, which is also a metaphor for this inertia. you know
The ennui that is,
yes,
being
the tedium
generated.
ennui.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yes, yes.
the her next film, The
Also,
Holy Girl, that you just said, is also situated in a fictive space called La Cienega. This is the
yes,
next film of after La Cienega.
yes,
Holy Girl is also situated in a fictive place,
yes.
La
Salta,
Cienega, where
Salta.
two girls are trying to again, explore their sexuality.
Yes,
Everything is repressed, the desire, the sexuality, the fear, the death, the life force, everything is suppressed. So it does not get a full exuberance, it is always stopped somewhere, which is kind of represented through the abrupt cuts that, quickly change the shift of focus from one event to another, entirely different, and doesn't give you the explanation why I'm changing to here, who is the narrator, what narrative position or point of view I'm taking, whose narrative point of view I'm taking. It does not give you the clarity all the time, does not feel liable to give you the clarity.
yes, well said. Also, that leads to the point that why, I mean, as a feminist, that she's so important, that she challenges, other icons, like say Inaritu or Alfonso Cuarón.
Absolutely.
Inaritu would be kind of, finding some moment where he could link all this in Babel or, Amadeus Perez, Cuarón in Inaritu, or invested in this kind. But here she challenges that, that, all these, stories coexist but are equally kind of, haunting and meaningless in a way that I
Yeah,
cannot hear, that it is not important for me to be smart, through a screenplay to link, because then ultimately you are catering to Hollywood by doing that.
absolutely.
In a way, through her this kind of fragmentary aesthetics, she's also making a strong feminist statement, what it means for those mothers in Plaza de Mayo to wait for their children. You get my point. It is not, like you have other stories so they can cohere and have this catharsis and go home. Even if aesthetically, you are like more progressive than Hollywood. But then, it is like, again, giving into that, But she defies, that kind of a thing. I think that is what is also special about her, authorship, as a filmmaker. Because
Absolutely.
it needs extraordinarily strong, not only vision, but I think a spiritual courage, to make this kind of a film. It's not easy.
No, no, no. And that's the precise thing I was trying to say, that when I was understanding her filmmaking process, I still try to find out that how it is being done. It's very extremely complicated.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
But her logic is that she is experienced with the sonic environment of Argentina. That's how she knows or accesses her memory or history through the memory. So that's how she can memorize or imagine or forward a thought towards that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Swarnavel, for all those insightful comments on the film.
Thanks. I'm sorry
Uh,
I took some time. Thank you. Thank you.
no, that's okay.
Passionate
Anyone
about
else?
cinema also.
I'll just come in for 2 minutes. Huh?
Yes, yes.
Hmm?
Yes,
Two things. I
Jayant.
think one thing we have not talked about, which very much there, understated patriarchy. In the film,
Yes.
that both the women are victims of patriarchy. In a different way. It is very much there. So she is making a statement. And the second is that we talked about how this fact of political violence let loose by the state has been dealt with by filmmakers. Mm, particularly this fact of people disappearing. There is an Indian film which talks about this in a very direct, in a definitely more direct manner. I'm talking about Mrinal Sen's Calcutta 71, in which there is a scene, there's a young Debraj Roy in the end. He's being pursued by the state machinery. In the end, again, an off-screen sound which tells us that he is killed, and that means that he disappears. Like hundreds and thousands of other young men at that time. And then his whole face is there in the screen, looking at us, looking at the audience, accusingly says, saying that, don't you see? Don't you see anything? That this is happening day after day, and you are all sitting and watching a film. You know, so that kind of a thing, which probably cinematically may not be very complex. It may be a little naive, a little unsophisticated, but I would say that it is very, very effective. And the same phenomenon is being addressed in a slightly different manner. And certainly the patriarchy is very much there for us to see, but it is not like in Bangla they say that it doesn't point fingers in your eyes and show you that, because one of them husbands is very much under the thumb of his wife, apparently, and the other one is so sweet and he does everything, without being told. This is patriarchy in both the cases, where the kind of swamp that these two women, particularly, they find themselves drowning in is the world of man. Is the world created by man, and that is why one little escape that they thought, not much of an escape, is an escape to Bolivia to do some shopping. Even that is frustrated in the end. Thank you.
Absolutely. Martel is very systematically throughout her filmography is creating very strong female characters, but and she and her male characters are not as complicated as her female characters. The female characters has lot of layers to it. It is very difficult to put them into typical gray, black and white norm. They are often portrayed through the gray tones. Each and every characters has the very gray tones towards it, and which is often a reaction to the patriarchy or the negotiation with the patriarchy all the time.
Yeah. Anyone else? Anyone else would like to come in now? Arun, Sanjay, Tarakeshwar. Okay, while they decide among themselves who must go in next, I would, as you said, it was quite an, to begin with, quite an unsettling experience, because you're used to looking out for a protagonist in a film, and here, it's taking you all over the place. And it's only in the course of the dialogue, a little bit of information about who is who may be just given to you. In other words, what I found very interesting is, if we think that the whole point of narrative cinema is to stage and narrate a story, here every attempt is made to take us away from this process of presentation. So it's not like a presentation of the story, so there is no attempt to present the story, as you said, by giving us a sense of causality, also by giving us a sense of the outcome of particular sets of events, even the interconnections between the characters, even where they are and how they are located. The sense of space also kind of shrinks because the characters loom large and kind of occupy the frame. So we don't really get too much of a sense of the space either. So it's a puzzling experience to watch the film as we go along, but something that we kind of go and reconstruct probably after the experience of the film, where we think, okay, this must be what must have happened, which again, you're not very sure. So there's nothing to endorse what you intuitively, what you intuited, about the film. So very interesting film, and gives us a new mode of viewing, I think. Yeah. Anyone would like to come in?
I was writing down your known points that you have shared, very important points that you have shared. That it is often produced a very puzzling and thing. Whenever I have to my students or to friends who just ask that give me some suggestions about the Latin American cinema, whoever has done that, this particular feeling that I have been continuously been presented by, even this is a feeling that I also felt when I first watched La Ciénaga. And this particular film produces this kind of stifling context that, which is what intrigues me in this particular narrative, that inherent violence or cruelty that presents over here.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is kind of makes the entire thing very complicated. There is an immense urge to access the history, but continuous obstructions. Each and every point of view shots are very obstructed, heavily clamored and crowded, with either through the gridded windows or the broken windows or mirrors, or breaking the frame into several. The not a single frame is very straight and centrally focused. They are always on the verge of being distorted. Distortion is the main element that is the visuality is trying to capture
Yeah.
throughout the when an auditory scope is kind of giving you a confusion and chaos, and visuality, through visuality it is presenting series of distortion, which probably is narrating the fabricated official history.
Yeah.
Uh,
Anyone?
Nikhila, can I?
Yeah. 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 Sure.
Yeah.
Geeta, go ahead.
Yeah. Ankhi, I was just curious to know how Martel is received in her own country. We know that she's very well received in the US, and she's also won a lot of awards in different film festivals. But what is the reception of her cinema in Argentina?
There's a very strange situation in Argentina that is also in majority of the Latin American countries. There's a similar kind of situation into the reception part of the Latin American cinema, the national, cinema from the national industries, not only just Argentina. That there is a very vibrant filmmaking culture that is present. There are so many film schools, so many amateur independent filmmaking practices. Each cinematic filmmakers are trying to push through the boundaries. If you read the interviews or about the personal anecdotes or point of views of the filmmakers, you will see that they're often arguing about that they want to explore what cinema as a medium is capable of doing, rather than creating a form of art or something. They are not interested in creating an art cinema. Rather, they are interested what cinema is capable of doing, how much I can explore or push the cinematic language to create a new one that suits my narrative style. But in these particular cases, we see that there is a very interesting films are happening in Latin America, which is extremely well received, as you said, worldwide, especially through the film festival circuit. However, the Argentines are majorly what used to watching Hollywood films. Very strangely, the popular cinema culture is majorly dominated by Hollywood narrative, and often, Argentine film audience are reluctant to watch Argentine narratives. Kind of they are very inclined to receive a continuous, smooth, invisible flow of narrative than a jarring, unsettling narrative style. And even in this particular position, the other directors which are get much more providence, Martel being a women filmmaker also not get that much of a limelight, but she is otherwise very popular face in the Argentine filmmaking circuit because she has a very important role to play in Argentine cinema, especially in this particular century, last 21 years. She's one of very key figure in the Argentine cinema, and several new Argentine directors are heavily influenced by Martel. Recently, I have one association with one Argentine filmmaker, Benjamin Neistat. During the process of my research, I met him in a film festival in Mummy in 2014. Since then, I have kept the connection between this filmmaker so that we have a very communication over the research that I do. And he provides me certain information about the reception and the box office data, which I have no access to. So he's a filmmaker of my age. He's around 34 years, and he is also heavily influenced by Martel. This December, I had a webinar organized in my university where Benjamin had come to speak. Benjamin was talking about Martel and how he was completely influenced by Martel, especially the soundscape that she designs. So Martel has an importance in the cinematic, but Argentine crowd are not very much invested in Argentine cinema. So there is a disparity, yeah.
Okay, that's very interesting. Anyone who would like to come in now? Paniraj sir has just come today. Sir, would you like to come in?
No, sorry, Nikhila. I congratulate for showing this film. I'm involved in theater and got late here, so I couldn't hear her. But I congratulate her for showing this film. It's a very great film. I just wanted to hear her. That's why I came late from a theater practice and I wanted to hear her. I just logged in.
Okay,
I'm
okay,
so much
okay.
honored. Thank you so much.
Okay, anyone else? Sanjay? Tarakeshwar? Sridhar?
No, once again, I want to congratulate her for one thing. I mean, it's kind of a cinema which some Indian young directors are also trying to make. I mean, apart from whether how many audience watch it and what is it, but it decides the course of cinema, that how do you make a non-linear, impactful cinema. It's one of the cinemas I always like to watch and appreciate and promote for that kind of this thing, and especially coming from Latin America, it's a model for Indian young filmmakers, which is very different from kind of film like Mani Kaul or Kumar Shani is making. Okay, it's a kind of a narrative which uses a lot of visuals and a kind of a what you call, it breaks away from felony in using non-linear narrative. It also breaks episodic narrative and poses a new kind of new episodic narrative, which Walter Benjamin would have been very pleased to watch this kind of new experiments in cinema. Yeah, they may not be having a good audience, but for a films like this, it's a kind of what you call awareness and a network of film appreciations that should promote these films, and it also poses a responsibility as an us to appreciate, for learn from these films, appreciate these films, and spread a network all through the world. That is how this grows, and I am thankful for her to presenting this kind of cinema, because from some filmmakers, so for example, Yashaswini Raghunath, what is Yashaswini Raghurandan? Yeah, she has made a short film, which is a very formless documentary. So many young filmmakers are making it. So we need to develop a kind of a network of appreciation for this kind of film. Then only they become what you call as a mainstream. So we want to find some way where this kind of film is exhibited, seen, discussed, and then it comes to a common sense. That's what I wanted to say. And I thank her, because I had not watched this film. I'm not sure how I missed it. And I very much appreciate this introduction to this cinema.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I have been always been interested with Latin America because it is always kind of challenges me my existing, opinions or the worldview that we all have been born. I cannot deny that I can be brown in the form of the world geopolitical situation, but I am a white in my own country. So this privilege had definitely numbed my certain senses, which, my introduction to Latin America kind of opened up and made me, kind of engage with my own identity, own history into a completely different light altogether. This is something that I always loved about Latin America. And definitely what Swarnaval sir has started talking about, that 100 years of solitude, that was the inception, precisely so. Marquez is something that led me to where I am today. If there was no Marquez, probably I would have done something else in my life.
No, but it brings me back Vinel's experiments during that time. I mean, where you dare to experiment. Vinel's experiments like that, I mean, where you don't have a linear narrative, which you want surreal, expressionist experiments, but you cannot replicate now, but you are finding a new way to do that. I very much appreciate. I mean, I was bowled over by this film because I had not seen it. It's because, I mean, that is the way one, I mean, awakes to reality. Reality of posing a aristocratic bourgeois life to such a kind of a raw emotions and raw visuals, it's enigmatic.
It is, because it is trying to, break away the conventional ideas of designing a non-linear narrative or using a handheld camera. These are the tools that are available into the cinematic language way before Martel is incorporating. It is not something new tools in cinematic language, like, but Martel is taking it into a different way because she is
Yeah.
using for an entirely different intention, unlike
Yeah,
the other, for example, non-linearity. Other filmmakers like Nolan or Tarantino, the way they are using the non-linearity, or what is their demand of introducing non-linearity in their narrative, Martha's intention or need or demand from her narrative is entirely different. She does not want to concentrate on the individual character and does not want, has her least intention to engage in that particular main character's personal struggle or the story. She's kind of interested about the collective trauma that experienced by Argentina.
yeah,
And
that's what I'm saying.
yes,
It's visually so powerful.
yes.
That's why it's a different kind of cinema. I mean,
It's because
this
it
needs to be taken
demand
very
is very
seriously.
differently
Yeah,
posited. It is the demand is completely different because it
yeah,
needs to tell a story of a collective trauma. So it,
yeah,
and the collective trauma is always an experience that is fragmented. You don't have a very continuous flow of experience of a trauma, because trauma itself is a very difficult emotions to process in our own mind. I cannot have a complete understanding or interpretation about my own personal trauma. So trauma is always accessed in a very fragmented, episodic manner, with a break and connected manner. So this is how her linearity is coming into the position. That is why her choice of non-linearity, that is, she's bringing into her narrative.
yeah. I mean, it completely smashes even the romanticism. I mean, movie showing some Latin American films with a lot of romanticism and this kind of Hollywoodishness, but just completely breaks that romanticism and exposes you to the horror of the society without showing it. I mean, I appreciated it so much in its visuals and its visual essay. Yeah, it's something. It's a different level. Yeah.
That's the reason. The space itself is not nurturing, not homely. Many films presents the space as something that you connect with harmonious manner to the nature.
Yeah.
Here,
Yeah.
the nature is creating the uneasiness.
Yeah.
The land itself is generating the trouble. The land itself is vicious, very, very merciless in its own
Yeah.
approach, and significantly cruel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I remember one film, The Land of the Little People. I mean, where, I mean, see, break away from romanticism of the, I mean, childhood. No, you can see the rawness of the, yeah.
It is that, what Rosha is trying to do, estranged
Yeah, yeah,
land. It
yeah,
is similar
yeah,
context you can find. The
yeah,
land
yeah,
is
that's right.
always estranged because
Yeah,
the history is estranged.
yeah,
The
that's right. I
entire
mean,
Yeah,
Like
they speak in the language of the colonizers. Their
colonized
original language is almost towards the extinct. Only the Aboriginal or the Indian population now, very, very small number of people held on
yeah,
to their original Latin American languages, like
yeah,
Quechua, Quiche, and so on and so forth. But the majority is still using their language as the colonial's language. So there is a
yeah,
kind of identity crisis which
yeah,
creates this form of alienation. The
mm,
point of view of the Creole or the Mestizaje or the Indians, there is so much of hybridity into the identity that it is difficult. The Mecha or the other characters are going through the suffering, but they are also inflicting the similar suffering through the Indians.
yeah, yeah,
Height of racism is present over there, you know so it is
yeah.
also kind of a very confusing to see that if a land has gone through so much collective trauma, how can they inflict that on another particular community, that is the Indians or Aboriginals, right?
Correct. But looking at the genre of films, I mean, like children are to be romanticized. No, I mean
No.
that's what I wondered. I mean, how conscious she's making in film, because you could have romanticized the violence of the children in there. I mean, she gets straight through it. I appreciated that much.
Yeah, she's
Yeah,
presenting the story that children are talking about a dysfunctional family. Her father
yeah, yeah,
stays
yeah,
here, mother stays here, this dog has been killed, this has been
yeah,
done. And I remember if we in our childhood would have been started talking something unlike child, our
yeah,
parents is to vehemently intervene and stop the particular process.
yeah.
That is my
No,
personal experience.
no, no, no. The
But
point is,
here
I
the
appreciate it so
parents are
much.
reluctant.
Yeah, I appreciate it so much because romanticizing children has become a genre.
That's what I'm saying. They are not applying the child gaze, which is
Yeah,
a very
yeah,
common usage of the tool, one of the very important tool to kind of
yeah,
make people think about a
yeah,
particular topic. Martel is
yeah,
trying to make people think, however,
yeah,
not using
yeah,
children in that manner. The children
yeah,
also embodies the cruelty.
yeah, yeah. That's right.
They are the embodiment of the cruelty.
Yeah,
Several particular frames just jars you. For example, in the
mm,
beginning, two little girls, very exaggerated makeup, are talking through singing through the table fan, and the closeness of the fan and the movement of the fan just gives
yeah,
you a feeling that it's just going to cut through. Is
yeah.
another violent bloodbath going to come or
Bloodbath, yeah,
not going to come?
yeah.
Yeah.
What heartens me is that so we have come a long way from third cinema of Solnas, and we are having a new cinema from Latin America. I am very pleased.
Ma'am was discussing in the beginning that different areas of my study. It is only because that in order to study Latin America, all these particular disciplines you have to consider by to understand. And definitely Latin American cinema took an entirely different shape and size into the transnational period. But however,
Yeah,
as I was my entire body of work depends on charting a narrative of the Latin American cinema history. So I have seen the thematic concerns are still, continuing from the third cinema time. It is still the acute underdevelopment that is being represented into different manners or different, kind of epithets. However, the entire production style has undergone a change because of the transnational co-production that has been introduced since 90s, mid 90s to late 90s.
that's what I appreciate, in the sense that I mean, like you cannot fix in a time. Third cinema,
No,
the spirit of third cinema should continue, but the way, the production, yeah, that's what I meant.
absolutely.
Because
It is bringing a very different, interesting
yeah,
kind of cinema.
cinema,
So
yeah,
yeah, I
Yeah.
started my research from third cinema, but right now I'm mostly interested in the contemporary cinema because
yeah.
they have a
I
lot of
did watch one
possibilities.
cinema, ma'am. I don't know whether I don't know the director, but I watched one film from Latin America, Alba. It's about a young girl. I think from 2017 Film Festival Circle. I mean, that's the kind of cinema which is coming from Latin America. It is very heartening. Yeah, it is a guide for all the alternative filmmakers. Yeah. kind of a new language of third cinema. Yeah, new grammar of third cinema. Because Hollywood, I mean, third cinema rawness, I mean, anybody can dismiss before glitch of the Hollywood, and a kind of following what Hollywoodish Latin American cinema is having. But these are the kind of cinema which compete with the grammar and aesthetics with the technical expertise. That's where the gamble is. Yeah, that's I appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyone else who wants to say something? Rajan, please go ahead. Yeah, please go ahead.
I just want to talk about the sound, because what you said about sound is very interesting, especially because of this Motorcycle Diaries, right? And Gustavo O Santaolalla, whatever his name is, right? Who also is a person who produces the sound for Dobby Ghat, right? And when we were doing a short course in FTII, Kiran Rao came in and somebody asked her these questions, right? And what was interesting is when Gustavo Olala came down, he went to actually listen to the sounds of the Dobbies at Dobby Ghat, right? So I found that very interesting when you put that up, right? And I'm totally fascinated by Latin American guitar composers, right? So that's something that is quite different from any of the European sounds that you get, right? And you were talking about how Hollywood is bombarding the films onto Argentina, but the question is, from Argentina you get this dance called the tango, right? Which has taken over Europe, right? So I think for me, when I teach Latin American literature, I begin with the tango, because for me that is something that actually sets Latin America apart, right? And of course, something very funny and comic that I told my students once. I said, one of the reasons I like the Pope is that he comes from Argentina and he knows to dance the tango, right? Now, so that's something again which is very, very interesting. The whole idea of sound, dance, and the difference that these people have, right? So yeah, and yes, I think Borges is talking about the minigay and the tango, right, in one of his short stories, where the similarity between that and Europe is seen in the waltz and the foxtrot. Foxtrot is American, and the waltz is German, European, right? So you have a similar kind of problems over here, because social problems, in the sense that these are body touching dances, right? So all those things are highlighted. And of course, we know about the tango, that it originates in the brothels of Argentina, right? So yeah, so that's my interest in all this. And the idea of the sound and the dance, especially, and again, how cinema affects the modern Latin American short stories, right? So when you read them, you can see that it's not the literature which affects cinema, but cinema has affected these kind of narratives of modern Latin American writers. That's the way I look at them, right? And that's my personal opinion.
Can you suggest me some of the contemporary writers that you're referring to? I would like to read them.
Well, yeah.
Which authors you are referring to about the short story?
A lot of them, but I don't. Their names are very confusing, and I don't really remember that, right? But I've got yeah, I can send them to you sometime. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Anytime. That will be fine.
In fact, I just got this book of women poets, which is called "These Are Not Sweet Girls." It's just here. Yeah, These Are Not Sweet Girls. So that's very interesting, edited by Marjorie Agosin, right? Yeah, so that's Latin American women writers. Yeah, so you might like to look at that. Yeah, so I have what else do I have to say? Yeah, I also teach them Latin American drama, which is something totally different, right? And that again, you might like to look at because they're not much in English, right? But there is this collection which I've introduced into the syllabus. Yeah, I'm sorry, which is interesting, and they've got people like Paz and Triana, and Gambaro, and all those kind of things, and very interesting stuff from different. As far as drama is concerned, and the one which you might like the most is Orchids in Moonlight, right? Which is about two film stars, right? And it's about Mexico, right? So you might so that's very interesting, and that's a musical piece also. Right? Yeah, that's a tango. Sorry, getting very
Thank you so much for the references. Yeah, I
yeah,
would
no,
definitely
I'm
love to
too,
look into that.
probably too emotionally.
I have no,
I
no,
should
no.
shut up and not talk too much.
I read some of them, but some of them I have not heard even. So it's a good
I've got a lot of
introduction.
short stories, but I don't know where they are just now. But I can contact you and give them.
Please do, please do. That will be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. Uh, anyone? Yeah, Tarakeshwar.
This is a loud thinking. So the cinema, if we are saying that the cinema is about uh, episodic nature of life, non-linear, non-progressive nature of life, so the cinematic form is mimicking uh, this life. So we are trying to justify the narrative form this film is adapting by taking recourse to uh, the life, quote unquote, reality. So if the life itself is meaningless, it is episodic, non-linear, non-progressive, we don't know how to make sense of it, but we try to impose a sense on what we encounter every day in a non-linear, non-progressive manner, and we select certain things and view them in a particular narrative so that we can assign some meaning to it. Once we assign some meaning to it, we get some kind of coherence and some kind of handle on the situation. So in that sense, we can negotiate the situation. So it's a discursive strategy by narrativizing the events around us, and we try to get a handle on them to deal with them. So if the film is also mimicking it, what we are trying to do is to assign some kind of meaning to the form by rationalizing it, by taking recourse to the reality, and again impose some meaning on the form itself. If the form is mimicking the meaninglessness, but we are trying to impose some kind of meaning to that meaningless form, isn't it?
Yes,
So,
I would not say it is trying to mimic a form. I think it is trying to create a form which is, as I said, that there is a very strange way in the Latin Argentine cinema, especially not other Latin American cinema is doing that as a prominent manner as Argentine cinema is doing, which in my thesis I have argued to be a mnemonic realism. A realism that is not really very going by the logic of verisimilitude. Rather, it is kind of a tracing the history or story or truth or information, whatever they are looking for in different contexts. The particular meaning shifts. They are trying to reach it through the process of memory, nostalgia, kind of accessing the memory. And in this process you will see that there is a strange blurring process of remembering and forgetting. In order to kind of resist the fabricated official history, it is often the Argentine narratives. I'm not talking about Argentine history, but the Argentine narratives in cinema, especially, are fabricating another memories. Also, it is a kind of a strange blurring into forgetting and remembering, which is kind of generating the sense of magic realism, even the sense of schizophrenia, that the remnants that we see in several Argentine characters. These are confused, solitary, very much solitary, and their reason towards their seeking solitude is not always understood.
Uh, I'm not questioning any of these interpretations of the Argentinian cinema and its form, but it's again a loud thinking at a general level. So
Yes.
about these non-linear, non-progressive narratives. Yes, life is non-linear, non-progressive. We impose some kind of form on it. How do we impose the form on it? By selection. Narration is basically a selection and then ordering of that selection in a particular form. So that assigns some kind of meaning to it. So even this kind of cinematic narratives, they do select, they do order, but it is non-linear, non-progressive. But the selection and the ordering of the uh, events still exist in these forms. And why this kind of selection and this kind of ordering? Yeah, they have their own purpose to do it, and we can interpret what is the purpose from our end based on our cinematic experience of that viewing. But the point I'm trying to make is that are we trying to neutralize it or deconstruct the narrative by explaining it in a very rational manner when that itself is trying to suggest an irrational manner? The life is irrational when the narrative is suggesting that the life is irrational. So the form has to be irrational to convey that irrationality of life. Then we are rationalizing it and we are assigning some meaning to it.
No. Let me get into polemics. So let me get into polemics with Tarakeshwar. Yeah, you got to have some position when you make a film. When you make a film, when you are an artist, you got to have a position. We have to have a position. We have to have a position in art, and we pose it through formalism. And then we pose it formalist narrative to our position. We get into polemics with the audience. That is the point. Now, what you are talking about? Aham Brahmasmi? No. We have a position. Latin American filmmakers like this one has having a position. We are posing in a formalist manner. This is a very concrete formalist examples. You have what we mean. This is not something nascent that disappears in the air. No, we have it states its position. The audience can have a dialogue with it. Who says that this is the correct position? We say that this is a dialogic position. Don't make it something like it's irrational or something. No, it's very rational, very societal, very rooted in society. See, every art from social positions, so it comes from urgency in society. Let's talk about that. The point is, let's not make it something we cannot understand irrational. It's very rational, very formalist, states its position, and it demands an debate. So let's allow that. I mean, let's not make it something like we don't. I mean, you impose on it. Nobody is imposing on it. Who is imposing? This kind of films are talking about Hollywood kind of portrayal of visuals, portrayal of art, portrayal of entertainment, mass showing. So there are kinds of something where we have to take a position, like take a position in the street and argue, and then that is a polemic. We should develop that polemic. It's a film polemic. Who says that we impose on it? Where is the imposition?
No, I am saying it. I am saying.
No. Where is the imposition? In the discussion, we should take a position. See, this filmmaker takes a position. She doesn't have a neutrality. She is not nascent in air.
No,
He is
nobody
not
is saying
nascent.
that.
No, nobody is nascent. Nobody, everybody is in society. Everybody, any art comes from society. We are physical, we are in a society. It's a thought which comes from physical existence in a society, and we have a position. Why we want to make it nascent? Who is imposing? Imposition, how do you interpret imposition?
Yeah, could I interrupt for a while? Yeah, so going back to the tango, I watched a documentary on the tango, and it's about Japanese children learning the tango, right? And we're talking about the form. So when the form of the tango is a very complicated form for anybody who doesn't. Okay, and what is interesting is the Japanese kids learn to do the tango with absolute finesse and absolute precision, right? Now, and when you look, so this is very the form has been captured, right? But then the life is not there, right? So I think that's where I think we should look at what does Latin American cinema and Latin American literature do? It's giving you life, okay? And how do you negotiate between the form and life, right? So I don't know. That makes sense.
I would like to say one thing here. What Tarakishwar sir was telling, it is actually one of the reasons. I agree with some of the sir's point, because the non-linearity is introduced in this particular narrative not because it is coming through the just experimenting with the cinematic language. Rather, this particular point is coming when it is trying to tell a narrative or the temporality of the country's history, and that history is very fragmented in nature, because there are a lot of gaps where the knowledge is not filled, because the stories of state violence are often fabricated, adulterated, distorted, hidden, manipulated. And in this process, the very entire people of the country is trying to access through that particular gaps that has already exist. And cinema or Latin American literature or Latin American music is trying to fill in this particular gap. And my opinion, this is an extremely personal opinion of mine, I think because of this particular tendency or instinctive nature, whether it is happening consciously by certain directors, or certain directors are doing very unconsciously. Not that each and every Argentine or Latin American director are doing this particular thing very consciously, but even this unconscious or conscious method, the non-linearity is coming to the point, even if it is not very structured non-linear narrative that we are very used to in European or Western narratives here and there, or in the art cinema circuit. This is particular narrative non-linearity is coming from the particular teleology of the history that is there in the present in Latin America, which is very kind of, in order to tell that story, non-linear is probably the my chosen mode of temporality. Otherwise, the narrative probably might not be completely told, because there are gaps, there are loopholes, there are breaking points, there are gaps obviously there.
Yeah, at this point, let me just read out what Sridhar has messaged me, and then I think Sanjay Kumar is also waiting to come in. So, Sridhar says, is memory the key to deterrence? How is the lived traumatic experience transformed into memory? Who are its trustees? In what ways does a society forget and remember? What kind of memory is involved here? Just a few thoughts only. So he is sharing some of these questions, concerns that have started from the film, I think. And now I think Sanjay was also unmuting himself. Maybe he would also like to come in now.
Ma'am, shall I answer the questions, or shall I just?
I think these are like, I mean, he's thinking aloud about these questions. Oh, Sanjay has gone. He's not around. Yeah. If you want to respond, you can go ahead, Ankhi.
Yeah, definitely, because one of the way when the official history is, as I said, that in this particular condition is so much fabricated, there is a tendency of accessing it in other way around. This is the, the unofficial origin of the unofficial history, which is completely accessed to folklores or local narratives, memory, experiences, journals, and personal retellings and narratives, that is conjuring up the unofficial narrative of the country, which is the very premise is the lived experiences. And often the lived experiences is experienced in exile rather than being in the country, or being completely detached and other way around into the, understanding the detachment from a diasporic existence or exilic existence, and then coming back to the country to see that not much has changed. One form of torment, gave way to another form of, state violence. And this is an ongoing process. This is what, in whenever you read any kind of Latin American narrative, it's not just cinema of Martel, it can be any narratives that we generate from Latin America that continuously talks about the series of this mishap that has faced by Latin America or suffered by Latin America. There's an endless series of it. This is the most interesting point that makes Latin American art forms so versatilely different.
Yeah. Thanks, Ankhi, for communicating your enthusiasm for Latin American cinema to all of us. We really enjoyed watching the film. I think we also had a very, very lively discussion today. Thank you for suggesting the film and for being with us late into the night for this discussion. Thank all the participants who contribute so much to making this Saturday discussion so rich and insightful for all of us. Thank you all. Goodbye and
Thank you,
good
Ankhi.
night. Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night.
Bye.
Good
Bye.
night.
Good night.
Good night.